Thank you for joining me on the Fire Rescue Wellness Podcast. I'm your host, AZ. I find the research and resources and then provide the fire service with the so what, now what, to ensure the health and well-being of every member of our profession. Together, let's thrive. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to the Fire Rescue Wellness Podcast. And today, I'm very excited to be here with my friend, Shanté. Shanté, say hello to my podcast people.
Hello, podcast people.
Oh, I love that. Shanté, this is the Happy New Year episode dropping right after the new year. It's going to be 2023.
Amazing.
And I want to talk to you today. I know, dude. I want to talk to you today because you are the mother freaking queen of living your best life. Would you agree?
I know. I will gratefully, greatly, easily, whatever the word is, accept that title. Like, I like it. And that has become, I would say, an inadvertent goal. And then a lifestyle that I have just gladly leaned into. So I will accept that moniker happily.
All right. As of today, you are the mother freaking queen. And we were just talking before I hit record. I met Shanté 7 long years ago at a RockTape course. I know, it was like 2 blocks from my fire station. And I grabbed my physical therapist and I'm like, hey, let's go take this RockTape course. And she's like, okay, it's good for me. I don't know why you're going to take it. But I learned a ton and I met a great person. So super grateful for it.
Dude, super grateful that we met, super grateful that the universe saw fit to cross our paths. Like, you had said that when we hopped on that it was 7 years ago, and like we just talked about, like, that's wild to me and how fast the time went. But I don't know, it's one of the coolest parts of that job that I had was meeting people and people like you along the way. And just like with everything else in life, like, there's so much value in starting, but there's even more value in continuing. And that's like what you have done and what this speaks to, of like, yeah, we met, but then you kept in touch and then you kept doing things and you kept growing and doing more stuff. And now 7 years later, I get to be on your podcast. Like, that's pretty dope.
It is pretty dope. Well, Shanté, I start all of my podcast episodes with 3 rapid fire questions. And if you are ready, I'm going to hit you with the first one.
Let's go.
Okay. Who is Shanté Cofield or the Movement Maestro?
So you put that second part in there and I was like, I'm the maestro. I am a physical therapist by trade, entrepreneur by choice. I am I don't want to say owner, the best friend to Rupert the Maestro, Rupert the Meowstro. And I am the owner of the Movement Maestro LLC, which is an online company that helps other online business owners build personal brands and create profitable online businesses, largely through the use of social media.
So incredible. I'm going to start, before my second question, I'm going to throw you back one of your quotes, which is, be relentless in the pursuit of what sets your soul on fire. So Shanté, what sets your soul on fire?
Happiness, joy. That is really what it comes down to. I think that if we want to get like bigger picture here and maybe deeper for a second, I think that if we were to ever for me, in trying to figure like, why are we here? What is the purpose? What is the meaning of life? I think it's to experience joy. And that is incredibly subjective. What brings you joy and all of your firefighter stuff, that's not what brings me joy. And that's phenomenal. And every person chasing after that. And so what sets my soul on fire is experiencing that joy. And now, has become helping others to do that. And some of that is just by me existing and me doing what I do. It's not necessarily like, I have to coach them and like work on mindset with them. I think there's so much value in just living your life and inadvertently giving people permission that they don't need to go and pursue their passion and chase their joy and be relentless in the pursuit of what sets their heart on fire and their soul on fire.
And you are so expert at that. Now, a little bit of credit to me, but most of the credit to you. But you are such an expert at just showing people the way. And as long as that person then takes the steps, it's amazing what can happen when you listen to the maestro.
Dude, all the credit to you. I think that, I want people to, I think it's very important that we own not just our failures. People are very quick, most people, right? Very quick to own their failures and own other people's failures, especially women. They're like, oh, it was my fault. I'm sorry. People must be apologizing for living. And I'm like, wait, what? So that's fine if you want to do that, but also own your successes and own your victories. Like, that was 100% you. I didn't take the action for you. You did it. It's the both and. Like, I think this is an example an example of when you can have two 100% where it's like, I did this and so did you. It wasn't like takes them away from this. Like, you did all the things and then you kept doing the things. Like we said earlier, super important to take the action, take the initiative, but it doesn't matter if you don't keep going.
Can you see why I love this woman? Just so good. All right, third rapid fire question. How are you changing the world, Shanté?
By showing up and simply existing. And I don't want to say a caveat, but I'll say a caveat because I don't know what other word I would use. I'll put a caveat there, and this is something I've been thinking about quite a bit. With the advent of social media, I love it. I am the first to champion social media. It's like my most favorite thing. It connects us. It is a phenomenal language. But social media has made people believe that just because they have an opinion, they deserve an audience. That's not the case. That's not why I do things. I don't think I deserve an audience. People should be watching me. The way in which I feel that I can best contribute, given my gifts, given my privilege, given my circumstances, is simply by showing up and living my life. And if people choose to watch, and if people choose to take notice, and if people choose to be inspired by it, amazing. But it's not like, I don't feel that this is my duty. I don't feel like this is I don't know. It feels my calling. I don't feel like I need or deserve an audience because of it. But I think that the way that I can best serve is simply by showing up and showing people that it's okay to be happy, and showing people that showing people that it doesn't have to be a struggle. Hard work, in my opinion, is a requirement. That is the price of admission. But it being a struggle, that is very, very different. And I think that we, as a society, for whatever reason, have championed the struggle, probably so that somebody could sell something. That's probably why we championed it. But this like grind in a negative way. Not I'm working hard, I'm working my ass off. I know your audience gets that. I know your audience gets the concept of putting in 1,000,000%, which is largely, I think, why you talk to them and you're like, maybe let's like take 10% and rest now. So they get that inherently. Right? But things don't have to be a struggle, and we're allowed to be happy, and we can have joy, and there can be multiple types of joy for other people. And so I think the best way that I can serve and show and help is by just showing up and living my life.
I would agree 100%. And this brings us to a great transition, which is firefighters and public safety in general. Firefighters, police officers, we're inherently pretty negative. Humans in general have that negativity bias, but firefighters and police officers, just because of our job,
for sure,
our lack of sleep, our exposure to trauma, we can really get in that negativity hole. And so how would you talk to my population and just give them some advice to get out of that mindset?
I love this discussion, first of all, because I haven't had something like this in maybe ever on a podcast, but definitely not recently. But I would say, AZ, that, I left the business of convincing many, many years ago when I stopped being a treating physical therapist. That was my first exposure to trying to convince people to change. And that was not fun. It was very bad. It was very stressful for me. I don't think people actually got helped. And I was like, I don't know if this is the way. And so I would say that it has to be a decision. You have to be sick of your own BS and be like, I want something different. And then, folks, when that window of opportunity presents itself, jump through it. And you have resources. Like, I'm so grateful. I brought you on to the podcast for this very reason. I want those resources to exist so that when people are ready, when they're like, yeah, I don't want to be like this anymore, I don't want to feel like this anymore, they know what they can do, and they can go and speak to you. Like, I don't think that there's anything I could say that will change people's minds or make them more ready. And that kind of circles back to what you had asked about changing the world. that's why I think the value of just showing up and leading from the front, leading by example, right? I think that if you want somebody to do something, the best thing you can do is do it yourself. It's not try to convince them or try to teach them all the benefits. Yeah, that's cool to have those resources there, but the most inspiring thing that you're going to do is do it yourself and show people life on the other side of that and show people the outcome of doing that thing. And I do believe that the most, when it comes to online business, right, there's always this kind of aspirational quality that helps out. And I think in general, aspirational qualities, like it makes us like want to do stuff. We're like, oh, I aspire to be like that. And I think the most aspirational quality is happiness. So you showing up, AZ, and pursuing your happiness and doing all these things outside of the traditional model is so beneficial. And it gives people just insight into like, hey, this is what life on the other side looks like. And when you folks listening to this are ready to change and you're like, I can't be like this anymore, cool, you've got resources. So that's what I would say. There's no convincing there or anything like that. The mindset shift starts when you are ready for it to change.
I recently gave a talk about habits and about wellness throughout your career. And I actually, with full credit to the maestro, put a slide in there about diversifying your joy portfolio. And so
it's big.
Can you talk to the listeners? I want to hear it from your mouth. What does diversifying your joy portfolio actually mean?
For sure. So this is actually a quote that I got from a former client, Holly. I am blanking on Holly's last name right now.
Sorry,
it probably
Holly.
won't come back to me because I'm old. But it is from a client, from Holly. And to me, what that means is giving ourselves reserves and not putting all of our eggs, the proverbial eggs, in one basket. Because we know we're going to need there will be times when it will be helpful to pull from other areas. And if we only have one thing in our life that brings us joy, the same way if we're investing in the stock market, if you only have one stock that you've invested in, that could be problematic. Because if that doesn't do so well, suddenly we're like, you see Rupert's tail.
I totally see Rupert's tail.
Just on the desk. Rupert, I'm trying to educate the people. So we know if you put all your eggs in one basket, you got one stock. If that stock is not doing well, then suddenly it is the end and you are just depressed. You're not in a good way. Whereas if you have other things and you're like, you know what, this isn't going so well, because that's life, right? Life is ups and downs. That's normal. So if we have diversified and we have multiple things that bring us joy, and I will add on to that, multiple things that bring us a sense of worth and self-worth. I think that's kind of where I'm getting at with diversifying your joy portfolio. It's also diversifying your self-worth portfolio. When we have times where this thing isn't going so well, cool, we can go draw from this other thing. And it doesn't have to be like massive things. So I'll give examples from like my own personal life. One is the weather. That is a big thing that brings me joy. I moved to California because I am grossly affected by the weather. I don't do well in the cold. Cold is a choice. I choose no. I don't want it.
Winter is a choice. Shanté says no.
Winter's a choice. I don't want that. It's terrible. So I'm here. I got palm trees that can really help me out. But what happens if it rains? What happens if it's a gray day? That does happen every now and again. All right, cool. Guess what else I have? I have a home gym that I built out during COVID, and I can go down there and I get a lot of value out of all self-worth, a lot of joy out of being in that gym. What if I don't feel like going down there because it's also kind of cold in there? I can get a haircut. Something as simple as that really brings me a lot of joy and just can totally switch my mood. I also have clients that I love working with. I have social media that I can hop on and get that connection from. So I have all these different things that I can draw from so that if this thing isn't going so well, cool, then I can go and borrow that joy, that happiness, that validation, that self-worth from something else.
And we as firefighters tend, because we're all or nothing personalities, we tend to sort of get very tied up in our career and tie our self-worth to that. And so another thing that Shanté says, which I think is brilliant, is do more shit that makes you happy.
That. I love a good obsession. I love that your audience is obsessed with what they do. I am grateful because I'm not doing that stuff. I am grateful for each and every person listening to this, that they have that obsession, that they have so much happiness and joy and self-worth and everything tied into it. I want that. I want you to do things that literally just light you up. But on the flip side is the importance of also just doing things that make you happy. I think that I was actually just having a conversation this morning with a client. There's value in taking some time and asking yourself why. I remember as a kid, maybe because I was like an only child for like a long time. I was an only child for 8 years and then that got snatched away. I love my brother very much. There's 4 of us now, but I think in those early years, I was just me. So I was asking myself a lot of questions and I was always like, why? Why do I feel this way? And not as a way like, oh, I have to justify why I feel this way, but like, what is it? What causes this? And so I think that there's value in figuring out why we are so tied to something, why we are so obsessed with it. And that's not, again, it's not to justify it. It's not because I'm like, but tell me why so we can see if it's good or bad. It's just to understand, why am I so into this thing? Is this the only place it's giving me external validation? Am I codependent now with this thing, on this thing? Just to get a little feeling there. And then from there, just the inherent value of sprinkling in, and it can be super simple. I said earlier, like a haircut, sprinkling in these other things that do bring you joy.
I do think that my population also struggles a little bit, just a tiny bit, with authenticity, because we sort of have to fit into this. We have a square hole, so we need to be a square peg to fit in there. And so we struggle a little bit with authenticity. But what do you think, Shanté?
Yeah.
Would you coach them up and say maybe more, a better way to spell more, them?
For sure. More them, MOAR. More is just a better way, in my opinion. Bigger, better way to spell more. It also just makes sense. Like we spell roar like that. And then we spell more differently. I'm like, that's stupid. So that's something I borrowed from Hunter Fitness. And I'm going to say I co-opted it and I've taken it because he doesn't use it anymore. So now it's mine. But this is, I think, another place where there's the both and. And my specialty is in helping people build personal brands. And it's building a personal brand outside of the traditional model. I left physical therapy. I couldn't stay and work for somebody and be the maestro. It wouldn't exist. It couldn't coexist. I understand that an entrepreneurial approach to things is not for everyone. And so there's the both and of the situation in which maybe in order to pay the bills and be part of this thing, we have to assimilate in some ways in order to stay part of it, because that thing we really value. And then I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that this is like what you said earlier, it really ties in of now, what about outside of this place? What about outside of this container? How can we show up in a way that is truly us and the things that we like? Because I get it. Like we exist in society. We're not existing in like just a vacuum of just us. Like there are things that in order to get these outcomes that we want, we have to kind of play by these rules. That's fine. So maybe in certain ways, in certain places, you have to play by the rules. And then you have the ability to really lean into what makes you, these other things, these things that really light you up in other areas. And maybe that does start to bleed into this other container where you kind of were, following certain rules. But this is where I want to circle back to what we said before about like life doesn't have to be a struggle. And I watch people just like bang their head against things. And I'm just like, I don't know if that system's going to change. So maybe like take what you want out of that and the good parts that are there and the things that you love about it. And then go do the other stuff over here because they can both exist.
So good. And both and. I would like you to will you explain that to my audience? Because we are an either or population. So tell us about both and. What does that mean?
For sure. And I think that's the both and. The both end of the both and is that multiple things can coexist at once. Multiple things can be right at once. It doesn't have to be just this way or that way. And given that multiple truths can exist, there are times when it is either or. And it makes sense that when you come from the background that your audience has, I find similarities between your audience and how I approach things because I'm very scientific with things. And I love hard facts because you're like, it's this or that. I played sports growing up. I am an athlete through and through. I love someone wins, someone loses. What is this tying? Like, I don't have time for that. Somebody gonna win, somebody gonna lose. It is a zero-sum game. That's the whole point of sport. So the both and here is that multiple things can exist. And given that, your audience does have a very real need to have certain situations be either or, cool, that reality exists. And the reality exists that many other places in life, it is a spectrum. It is, there are gray areas, there are nuances where things can be both and where it's not all or nothing, it's all or something. And all of those things can coexist. And the beautiful thing is that we as humans have the mental capacity to choose and identify which situation gets what. And I think that probably your people might be actually the best at deciding that and making decisions and being like, what is the right decision for this situation? They're probably some of the most skilled people at doing that.
I think you're absolutely right. And as you were talking, it just occurred to me that even if you are not an entrepreneur, and even if you are not an online business owner or a business owner at all, you still have a personal brand. You still have a personal brand. And
amen.
We always be branding.
Always be branding. You are. And whether you want to or not, you are always branding. So AZ just threw in there as something I say is always be branding. And that's like a very, it's a very colloquial use of the word branding that I put out there. Because when I'm talking about that, what I'm actually saying is always be leaning into your brand identity. So as it relates to logos and colors and fonts for any like business owners out there, that's your brand identity. So I'm all about like, put that stuff everywhere. Put it, maybe not on your car. Sometimes that looks a little weird, but like put it everywhere else. Get a tattoo of it if you want. Like if you were able to see the video that we have going on right now, like I have my logo behind me, I have my logo on my sweatshirt. I am always leaning into that brand identity because I love it and I'm proud of it. Taking a step back in the bigger picture here, and what AZ just said, and I loved it, is that whether you want it or not, whether you like it or not, you have a personal brand. Your brand or branding, well, let's take a step back. Your brand is your reputation. Branding is how you make people feel. Period. So whether or not you want to have a brand, it doesn't matter. You have one because it's how you're showing up in the world. It's how you're interacting with people. And circling back again to what AZ said, I think that the best thing we can do is simply show up as ourselves. I get that for many people, that's one of the hardest things to do, but that is the best thing that you can do for your happiness, for your longevity, for sustainability of this quote unquote brand, aka to make your life easy and happy, is to show up with authenticity, to show up as yourself, to be the brand that you are. And
do more shit you love. And when possible, outsource the rest. Yeah. Outsource the rest.
You don't like it, outsource it. Absolutely. That's a very valuable lesson. And I think that for me, when we talk from a business perspective, I'm always like, prevention doesn't sell. It's not sexy. And just as humans, like our brains don't work that way. You spoke about it earlier. Negativity bias. Negativity bias kicks in, not necessarily as preventative. It really kicks in after the fact. And we're like, that was really bad. I'm not doing that again. Right? It's not to kind of necessarily stop us that way ahead of time. And so when we're looking at kind of outsourcing and things like that and making change, typically we have to get to kind of that breaking point. And that's okay. Like I hear, from my background, from the movement space, people talk about the resiliency and the robustness of humans. And then in the next sentence, they're like, oh, but don't do too much. And I'm like, go ahead. Do too much. Because then you will change. Then you will say, you know what? I need something different. And then you have awesome people like AZ with resources to help you change. And you will be okay. Like my background with movement, and I was into CrossFit for many years. I am not built for CrossFit. AZ knows. She's seen me in person. I'm built like Jiminy Cricket. I'm not as tall as AZ, but we're both like slender people. We're not like meant to be doing CrossFit. They'll like lift this heavy stuff. It's a long distance for the weight to travel. But one of the things that the physical therapy world would say about CrossFit was that people could get injured. And I contend I'd rather them get injured than get diabetes. But that knee pain, is okay. That knee injury is okay. We can work through that. And maybe you will always forever, worst case scenario, have a little hitch in your get along. Maybe. But the quality of life that you've had because of the people that you've met, the lessons that you've learned because you've done this thing, the joy that you found because you did something that made you happy, that far outweighs that. We are incredibly robust and resilient as a species. And so I love that your audience is already like on that side of I do the most. Okay, cool. And then when you have decided, you've made that decision, dude, I did too much. Okay. Now you go to AZ. Now you go and utilize those resources. And now you may be outsourced because you're like, I don't feel like doing that thing anymore. Cool. Now we outsource it.
And one of the things that Shanté, I think, is her messaging is so clear. She says this all the time. When you're looking to change yourself, your habits, your life, whatever, let it be easy. Let it be easy.
We spoke about this earlier. And people championing the struggle. And I think they conflate it with hard work. And your people understand the value and the necessity of hard work, but it doesn't need to be a struggle. And so there is, again, value in, I did a whole, I was really into breathing. That sounds funny, but I was really into the breath and breathing for a time in my career. And the magic to me of breathing and the magic to me of a breath is the pause that it gives you. It gives you a moment to respond instead of react, which I think your people inherently understand. There's a difference there, and making that better decision for the situation and just taking a moment, that pause to say, am I going to respond to this, or is it just going to be reactive and not necessarily lead to the best outcome? So I totally lost my train of thought there. What was the question you just asked there, AZ?
No idea, but hey, Shanté has a course on breathing. We're going to put that in the show notes.
I had like a point there that I was going to come back to. But making it a struggle. Yes, there it is. So that's real life also, people. Like owning your shit. I don't know if you can curse in here. Owning your stuff. Did I forget what I was talking about? Yes. And so I just said it, and then I come back to it. So the struggle there, we understand the inherent value of working hard. But if we take a pause, we take a moment and just think, am I working hard or am I choosing the harder path? That's different. That is different. Where some people will just inherently choose the harder path because they think they're supposed to struggle. You can work incredibly hard on something that you love, and it's not a struggle. So the value there, especially if you've just done it for years and years and years, and it's kind of ingrained in us like, struggle? It is a mindset shift. And this is, again, where perhaps it's beneficial to get to a point where you're like, I'm sick of my own BS. I want something different. And when you get there, then you have to actively, consciously make different decisions. And so the breath becomes incredible. They're an incredible tool of, I'm going to take a moment just to decide, right? Am I working hard or am I just choosing a harder path because I think there's more value in that? I think there's so much value in working as hard as possible, but it doesn't need to be the harder path. You can let it be easy. It's totally fine.
Amen, amen. And I believe it was Viktor Frankl who said, between stimulus and response, there's a space, and in that space, you get to choose, right? You get to choose.
Right there. It's where the magic happens. And yes, we get more proficient at that the more times that we're exposed to certain situations, but still at the end of the day, just recognizing that there is choice there.
I think, Shanté, there's a big parallel between your online entrepreneurship and firefighters who might want to change their life. And here's where I'm going with it. Your advice has always been, find someone who's doing what you want to do, and then listen to what they're saying, and then do what they tell you to do.
That's it.
It's that simple.
I think the big thing with that, AZ, is that, and kind of what we've been talking about all episode, and it's a really good segue from this last part and Viktor Frankl and such, is that it's all a choice. Happiness is a choice. I think it's a skill as well, which is why when we were talking about before about diversifying your joy portfolio, like these are conscious decisions that you make. It's a skill, something that you actually have to work on. And so Some people have to work harder at things. It's no different than, I love speaking to this audience because it's a physical audience. So they understand where sometimes you have to work harder than John. John is just good at that thing. AZ is good at that thing, but you're good at something else. And so AZ has to work a little harder on this thing that you're inherently good at. And so happiness is one of those things where for some people, they do have to work harder to be happy. But again, this comes to that discussion from earlier. When you make that choice of, I want to change something, you make that decision, cool, now you get to put in the work. And happiness is 100% work. I think it gets easier. It's because it is a skill. The more that we do something, the easier it becomes. So for me, I was not as happy when I was living in New York City. And it was harder for me. I think in general, I have a happier disposition, but it was harder for me. And I was not as happy when I was in New York City towards the end. It's dark there, it's cold, like it's you're always working. I was working in a setting that I didn't love. And so I had to make choices, right? I got sick of it. I moved across the country and made active choices and active decisions and said yes to certain things and no to other things in order to make that change in my life. And now it is so much easier to actively see and choose happiness. I can find happiness in a palm tree. I get it where other people will be like, what? You got happiness in a haircut? Yes, because it's a skill that I have refined over time. And so if you're listening to this and you're like, it's not easy for me, cool. Life's not fair. Those are the cards that you've been dealt. And I think your people get it. Like, I love talking to a physical audience. They just get it. I don't have to like tiptoe around it and be like, but you're special too. Like, they get it. Some things aren't fair. Sometimes people have to work harder than other people. But the beautiful thing is that this is a skill, which means that you can get better at it and, you can improve.
Shanté, I want my audience to understand what a big change you made. First off, in general, a firefighter in the middle of their career is probably not going to say, I don't want to do this anymore, and pick up their life and move across the country. That's probably not going to happen. But I want them to understand the enormity of what you did. When I met Shanté, she was a physical therapist living in New York City, pretty new grad, I would say, maybe 5 years out.
5 years. Yep.
Okay.
5 years out.
So tell the audience how you got from there to palm trees.
For sure. So started as a physical therapist, was pretty disenchanted by the model, but, feeling like, I think that like the situation you just described where I was like, but I have $1 zillion in debt and I went to school and like, I can't change this right now. So I'm going to make the most of it. I'm going to figure out how to kind of make this work for me. And that decision came after being in it for quite some time. Like, I was just pushing through 1 year out. I was like, this is terrible. 2 years out, I was like, I'm still in it and like trying to make decisions, trying to make things change. And I didn't really make a change until 5 years later. So I started doing CrossFit, and because of CrossFit, found social media because I was just trying to get better at CrossFit and learn more things. And that opened my eyes to just other things that were out there. But I was still having my regular job, my regular PT job. From there, I started a side hustle, which was still physical therapy, but it gave me a little bit more, I don't even want to say flexibility. It just gave me a little bit more autonomy in how I was treating, which kind of was a way of diversifying my joy portfolio at the time and within the best way that I could. I love that you said like a firefighter mid-career isn't going to change. Cool. I'm not going to ask you to, because that may make you actually more unhappy. But I was like, okay, what can I do within this situation in order to try and find some happiness and in order to try and diversify my joy portfolio? So I was doing the side hustle, and because of social media, found that company, or was introduced to that company, RockTape. For the first time ever, I actually asked for something and wound up getting a job with them. And then from there, I started traveling the country teaching for RockTape. And I was just like, whatever you want me to do, I'll do it. Wherever you want me to go, I will go. And that allowed me to leave my physical therapy job. But I was at a point where I was just like, I'll work at Costco. Not that there's anything wrong with working at Costco, but I was just like, I was there, and I had the ability because of decisions I had made. Like, I didn't have kids. I didn't have someone that I was like, oh, I have to like, worry about other people. I could just be like, this is for me. So like, I wanted to acknowledge that, like I said earlier, about my privilege in that. And then from there, getting that job with RockTape, I was like, okay, I see how much money I'm making. I see that I could make this change. And it took me, I think, 2 years, and was able to move across the country to California. And I will say, I don't want the story to ever sound like it was some massive leap. It was a series of very small steps. And from the outside, people oftentimes, that's one of the toughest parts about like recounting a story on a podcast or anytime, because you're just like cognizant of the time and you're like, but it took like 4 years, but I'm going to try and do it in like 25 seconds. And it can sound like, I just like did this thing and I took a big leap and I was fine. I took a series of very small steps over a pretty significant amount of time. And if we zoom out, it was a big change. But if we zoom in, we see it was a small step and a conscious decision, a small step, a conscious decision, or a conscious decision, small step. Because I'm all about safety, folks. I'm not jumping. I don't really jump so well. Every time I jump, I end up getting hurt. My knees, I don't have the best knees. So I am more about taking calculated steps. And those calculated steps allowed me to move to California. And from there, 2020 was actually very good for my business. That wasn't that long ago, right? That was when I made the hard shift into online business. And I was like, I'm not treating anymore. I'm not doing any kind of, I didn't stop treating in 2018, but I was like, I'm not doing any kind of content that is related to movement or anything like that. But it was small, calculated steps over time. So I love that you brought that up with your audience of like, they're not going to quit their job right now. Please don't. I don't want you to be homeless. I don't want you to be poor. I don't want you to leave something that clearly really you enjoy. But we can put little things into place and we know the value of these small actions. And suddenly it's 2 years later, 3 years later, 4 years later, 5 years later, and it is a massive change and you're in a way better place mentally, physically, emotionally, location-wise perhaps as well.
I heard 3 really important things that I want to summarize there. First of all, always ask for what you want. Side story, Lex Lancaster is your right and left-hand woman. Why? Because she asked. She asked. So ask for what you want. You always have choices. Even when it feels like you don't have choices, you always have choices. And then you don't have to be burning the bridges and burning the ships.
No,
Take
please don't.
the small, comfortable steps.
I love that second one that you put in there, Izzy. You always have choices. People will convince themselves that they don't because it's the choice that they don't want. You may not always have an easy choice, but we always have choice. And I think that ties into something that I consider like a value of mine, which is radical responsibility, which to me, and I feel like it's kind of inherent for your people. Like it's something you do inherently and we take it all on, which can be a bad thing, a curse, but also to me can be so freeing because then it does mean you have control over a situation. Like I have a choice. It may not be an easy one. It may not be a fun one, but I can actually, dictate the outcome of it. This outcome may not happen tomorrow. It might not be for 10 years, but what else is going to happen? Like, what else are you doing? What else are you doing?
Got to be living your 10 years anyway.
That's it. Exactly. So I really like that second summary there of you always have choice. Always.
And especially in the fire service, most of us function in a pension system where it can feel like when you start the job, you have to get to the finish line. And you do in order to collect your pension. But that still doesn't mean you don't have choices. If you decide 10 years in that the fire service isn't what you're wanting, I wouldn't quit today, but start putting the things in place so you can live your best life, because that's what we're talking about, living the best life.
Dude, we get one life. Like, I think that's, to me, the most, we've talked about in the past. I think motivation as it relates to like something falls out of the sky and you want to do something now is largely a myth. But if it was to be a truth, to me, the most motivating thing is that we're going to die. Like, you have fixed time here. It doesn't mean that there should be this like horrendous urgency, but also you're going to die. The fact that we age, right? It's not like we stay the same age and then we die. Like, not we stay 36. So I'm 37 right now. It's not like I stay 37 for 80 years and then I die. You age, which means that you have a finite or a fixed amount of time to do certain things and enjoy them in the same kind of way. Like, you probably are not going to be able to like physically travel like when you're 90, the same way that you could physically travel when you were 30 or 40. And so leaning into this and leaning into the moment, to me, is so valuable and also just motivational for looking to find that kind of motivation. So putting those things in place, taking those small steps, and yeah, maybe it is a massive career shift. Maybe it is. Like I love that AZ also said, like, don't quit today. Don't quit today, because that will probably be very bad. But maybe it ends up being this massive career shift that kind of happens gradually over time. I don't know what that is. Again, this is the beauty of everyone's joy is unique to them and is subjective to them. But we get one life, and it's all you need if you do it right.
Life is short. Buy a bright green Jeep.
I love that Jeep. That was a revelation. Not necessarily buying the Jeep. The Jeep was a byproduct of a revelation that, like, you don't have to wait to be happy. So I read that book.
So good.
Right, I read that book, The 4 Hour Workweek. I think a lot of us had read Tim Ferriss's 4 Hour Workweek. I don't particularly like him, and like even parts of the book, I was like, ew, you're like kind of the worst. But the basic premise of, right, take what serves you, leave the rest. The basic premises that were set forth in that book, and what I took away from it was that you don't have to wait to be happy. And given the trajectory that I was on with physical therapy, it was like, be a staff PT, maybe become a director, maybe advance a little bit more than that, maybe open your own clinic, but that also sounded kind of terrible. And then when you're like 50, you can like do stuff. And I was like, what? That seems like really bad. I don't know if I want that. And this isn't to say that like you can't have work and this other life, right? So it sounds like that as I'm saying it, because for me, I didn't really enjoy physical therapy, but in terms of whatever brings you so much joy, that's what I said earlier, I love that your people find such passion and such happiness in their career. Amazing. That's phenomenal. To me, all it meant was you do not have to wait to be happy, whatever that happiness looks like. I'm not trying to like travel the world and like work from the beach in Bali. Like that does not actually sound at all fun to me. I just wanted to be able to work from home. I have an amazing cat I want to hang out with. I wanted to live near the beach. I did, AZ, always want to have a Jeep. Growing up, I wanted a Jeep. My mom was just like, first of all, we didn't have that much money, but like my mom was like, they flip over. And I was like, but I want a Jeep. And she was like, they flip over. The little ones, I guess, I feel like a 2-door, but like they flip over. And all I wanted was to live by the beach and have a Jeep and have a surfboard sticking out of the back. AZ, I don't go in the water. I do not go in the water, but I still was like, I want to have the surfboard out of the back. I want this. That feels like, I know that would make me happy, because like the small amount of times that we could go on the shore when I was growing up, I would just love it. And I was like, I want this life. And I realized like when I got the Jeep and I moved here that I didn't have to wait a zillion years to be happy. Like, yeah, there is some like delayed gratification there of like the time it takes to like earn the money or whatever, because we live in a society where we need resources. But I didn't have to wait till I was 50. I didn't have to struggle first and go through all this terrible stuff. Yes, we have to work hard. It's the price of admission. Easy peasy. But I didn't have to wait for that happiness by any means.
And whether you knew it or not, you taught me that lesson when we met at the RockTape course. So I am so, so grateful for you, my friend.
Dude, did not know that, but that is awesome. I'd love to hop in and just say one more thing. I know I talk a lot, but it is what it is. But I think it's really important to make sure that the happiness that you're going after is your own, right? Borrowed goals ain't the way. And I wanted a Jeep with a surfboard that I would never use. I have that. I have a surfboard it's in my living room.
Stop it.
It's decoration. So it's a custom painted, and it has a Jeep on it. It has my Jeep on it. And like, it's a scene from the beach. This guy that lives near us, Van Toons, he does them. And I got to drive it home. So it like stuck out of the back of my Jeep. And so I had that moment for, 10 minutes. He lived close. It was like a 10-minute drive. And I was like, there's a moment. I live by the beach and I have the surfboard sticking out of my Jeep. But I think where I see people start to go astray is they borrow happiness, and they never perhaps had that pause to say, is this what I want? It was reactionary. It was society told me to have this, to have a picket fence and the kids and the life like this and the big house. And then suddenly you're in it and you're like, but do I want this? And I don't think it's ever too late to, again, start to turn the Titanic. It's very slow, right? It's not going to be like, we just jumped overboard. But I think it's so important. And when I had that quote that you brought up from earlier, it's be relentless in the pursuit of what sets your soul on fire? What is it that you actually want? What does that look like? Maybe that is working a zillion hours. I don't know. But if the goal is yours, you won't burn out. If the goal is someone else's, you will. And it will be a miserable existence. So making sure that it is not a borrowed goal, that it is not borrowed happiness, that you've given yourself the time, the moments, the pauses to be like, is this what I actually want? And then it's okay if you think it is. And then you start it and you're like, actually, no, it wasn't. It's okay.
So my firefighters really think about this. You're going through the promotional process because you think that you should get promoted to lieutenant captain, battalion chief. Is it really your goal, or is it just something that everyone else thinks that you should do? That's great advice, Shanté.
It's huge. I mean, I get it. I want to really acknowledge I have a friend who is, she's in the Air Force, and she's like, I don't know. I don't really understand rank. Like I conceptually understand it, but I don't know like the names of the things. And she's very high up though, because I've gone to a zillion promotions and now she's like working in DC. And I get being so far into something that it just doesn't actually make sense to back out or to change. And I would say find the happiness in there because you stuck with it for a reason for that long, and find the happiness within that. I could say there possibly are circumstances where you're just like, no. But I think that things that do have a bit of a finite date, because you're talking about before, like pension and things like that. Like I'm thinking about soccer for me. And by the time I was in college, like I knew the whole time growing up, that was my sport. And it was like, you're going to go to college and you're going to play in college. And part of it was like, I wanted to as well. Like there's all these factors of like, you want to make people proud, but also I really enjoyed playing. I was good at it. Like it wasn't just like a borrowed goal. I tore my ACL and everything changed. And I was like, I don't know if this is actually, there was a big pause, right? I don't know if this is, I don't know. But still went to college, and when I was like, I don't want to go to UNC anymore. I'm not trying to do that. I'm not trying to play professionally. Like I want to keep playing because I've done this. I've done so much and it is a part of me. And I am incredibly proud of all that I've done. Absolutely. So for me in college, were there times where I was like, this was kind of not fun? For sure. But was I going to jump ship and stop early? No. So I do, there's the both and of that situation of, yeah, you've gone through it this long and maybe it's not the thing that's bringing you the most joy, but this is where we diversify the joy portfolio. And also you've been in this thing for so long. I'm sure you find value in this and you're incredibly proud of it. And there's a reason that you stuck with it. And maybe part of that reason was external, but there's probably some part of it that's internal too. So can we lean on that, get through these things, get through that time period, and then go and start the other things? And the beautiful part about that is that ideally, like Az said earlier, perhaps we're diversifying the joy portfolio as we go. Like I'm looking at my camera right now. So the first thing that comes to my mind is like, maybe you like taking pictures. Cool. Go and do that. Maybe you like talking, recording stuff, start a podcast. So you stay with this thing that maybe doesn't fully let you up, but you can now diversify that joy portfolio and pull from these other things. And that pulls you through. And then when that time, that, chapter is closed, cool. Then we're on to the next.
I just can't with that advice. It's so good. I have been looking forward to this conversation for so long, Shanté.
So
and it's just been my honor to have you on today. And I do want to be respectful of your time. So if you had just one little outro to leave everyone with, what would you tell the listeners?
I'm going to take a pause and think about it. I think I would say, kind of a two-part here. Number one, skipping your demographic, thank you for all that you do for us. Like, it is incredible what you choose to do and you running into these situations. And I am incredibly, incredibly grateful. And on the heels of that, I would say that your happiness matters too.
I think we can pretty much drop the mic now. That's pretty good. So for my listeners, if they would like to get in touch with you afterwards, I'm going to assume you'd like them to reach out on Instagram. Would I be correct?
You are 100% correct, because that's easy. It's fast. Let it be easy.
Shanté actually puts out outstanding content on Instagram, not just about movement, not just about business, just all of it. It's all so good. So I'm going to encourage all of you to go follow her on Instagram. I will put it in the show notes. And with that, I think we can say that the Maestro and AZ are officially out.